Uh, First of all, I have to thank the organizers of this event for inviting the Department of Wildlife Conservation. And it is not a technical presentation as such, but I was asked to make a presentation on the wildlife related laws and especially relevant to the research and what are the privileges that researchers are having. So my presentation title goes like the evolution of wildlife conservation law of Sri Lanka, privileges and responsibilities of researchers. I'm Ranjan Marasinghe, Director Operations. And I found that the theme of this event goes like, let's protect Sri Lankan biodiversity. So I would say it's a very old caption, because from 1937, we are discussing this. And if you go to United States of America, where people believe that the first national park was created in 1880s, they were talking about the same thing. So that's why this the wildlife conservation and protected area conservation came to the picture. Why should we protect the biodiversity of Sri Lanka? I think from the morning till now, you were discussing biodiversity and why we should protect the biodiversity of the country. There may be 1,000 reasons you have discussed, but in simple terms, it's that the biodiversity protects you. That's why we should protect biodiversity. And now, is it significant? Now, if you compare, if you see the size of the country, if the entire country, removed the entire the fauna and flora removed from the country, will it do a significant change to the world? I guess no, because we are a small country. But there may be repercussions in the future. But rather than the academic requirements, laymen, so the people like us, we want to protect our biodiversity because we are planning to develop this country, and the best asset that we are having is the biodiversity. So we have to protect that for the future generation, because we want to develop our country, because now it is a developing country. We want to make it one day a developed country. Then who should be protecting the Sri Lanka's biodiversity? Now, in my presentation, I'm going to discuss how the wildlife law came into the evolved during the past, and what is the support given by that law to the researchers, and what are we expecting from the researchers in return. To answer this question, I will answer this question later. Now, before that, we have to talk about protection of biodiversity. How can we do it? Now, there are three main ways of doing it. One is voluntary action by everyone. So biodiversity, we are part of the biodiversity. So everybody, every human being has a role to play. So it is it's a combined kind of an effort. Now, such an effort will be fruitful if and only if every individual aims at maximizing collective utility or collective satisfaction. So everybody is very socialist. They are focusing on the social satisfaction or collective satisfaction. Then it will be successful. But regarding human behavior, more realistic view of human nature is basically sinful and self-centered, they say. And Adams ate forbidden fruit. So that is our history. So that means generally people are bad. So we can't expect this kind of a society any part of the world. Then the other approach is to protect the biodiversity or that resource by the state. By the state means by law. So most of the conservationists, there is a confusion regarding conservationists or protectionists, but they wish to call them conservationists. Conservationists everywhere in the world, they prefer protection because they believe that biodiversity cannot be conserved or preserved if state is not intervening and strict laws are not enforced. Then the third way of doing it is protect by the market mechanism. That is the other side of it. So the economists, green economists, they believe that free market can take care of itself. So if the market is allowed to take its own decision, then it will be capable of protecting the environment. So there are a philosophy called free market environmentalism, and in 1990s, the new ideology came into the picture, which is called green liberalism, and they also share to some extent this thinking, and I think that promotes the conservation rather than protection. That means wise use is allowed. So there are three alternatives or to choose from. So how can we do it? Now, if we compare command and control, that means enforcement of law, and market-based environmental regulation, that means economic tools. Now, command and control means protection by use of law. Now, it is successful if and only if the rule of law exists at the extreme level. So what is the rule of law? That is closely related notion is the idea of equality before the law, which holds that no legal person shall enjoy privilege that are not extended to all, and that no person shall be immune from legal sanctions. And we know in our, at least in our part of the world, this is not that true. So that is that if and only if condition is not satisfied. Then regarding market-based environmental regulation, it can give successful results if and only if perfect competitive market without market failures prevails. So again, markets are always failing. So government has to intervene. So it is also not the ideal option. So now we are in a conflicting situation. Now, during 1998, there was a person called Marshall Winsberg. He wrote a book, Green Liberalism, the Free and Green Society. And they promotes liberal on social issues and green on economic issues. Now, they are very liberal on social things like feminism, various things. But when it comes to the green side of it, the conservation side of it, they say that government should intervene, and they reject the idea of absolute property rights, because in free markets, economists want to have absolute property rights if the market needs to be perfectly competitive, and they don't accept that and accept restraints that limit the freedom to abuse nature and natural resources. That is one change they are having. They reject the control of population growth and only control over the distribution of resources as incompatible with the individual liberty. Now, even though they promote the protection of the environment, they never advise the population control because they are liberal on that aspect. So again, there's a problem. Then favoring supply side control, more efficient production, and crabs on overproduction and overexploitation. So if you go through all these ideas, there are they are internally conflict because one is conflicting with the other. So that is green liberalism. So in the ideal world, we have to have a mix. We have to work voluntarily. At the same time, we have to have a mix of command and control approach and market-based regulation. Why I explain this? Because I am going to discuss the law of the country. And if it is not following these concepts, then we have a problem. And if it is okay, then there is no issue. But we have to have an understanding about these areas. Now, what is the principal law governing the biodiversity protection? People say that is the Fauna and Flora Protection Ordinance, number 2 of 1937. So today is, now it is 2022. The law is 1937. So most of the people say FFP is an outdated old piece of legislation which need to be scrapped. But at the same time, there is another strong supporters, the Fauna and Flora Protection Ordinance. They say it's a very strong piece of legislation which is exemplary, and it helps us to protect the biodiversity. So we have to identify whether it is a law that we have to scrap or whether it is an example for others. Now, let's discuss about the evolution of Fauna and Flora Protection Ordinance, number 2 of 1937. In late 19th century, now I'm not going to discuss the global context, what had happened in the elsewhere in the United States or European area, the Great Britain, India, what happened during these times. There was a different, there was a Great Depression during that time. As a result, the United States, they were like the newly recruited multi-purpose workers nowadays. They have created a different corps, that is, they have given youths jobs, and after giving them job, they had nothing to do, so they were engaged in planting trees. So that is how most of the protected areas were created during that time. So that is a different story. Globally, there was a different political environment, but in Sri Lanka, it's about to get the freedom, and British was having a second thought about the Asian countries like us, because in their balance sheet we are not giving them adequate profits. So India and Sri Lanka, India was about to remove from their kingdom, and Sri Lanka automatically got the independence. So during this time, before the independence, in the history, there's a person called Colonel Clark. It is an army guy. He was the conservator of forest. He brought the disastrous effect of the commercial exploitation to the notice of the government of Ceylon and advocate immediate legislation which would forbid the destroying wild animal for the export of hides. So now, during this time, this is not that they had they truly believe this thing, but international politics was as such that they wanted to populate this kind of ideas, because in Britain also there were voluntary organizations, upper middle class organizations working toward conservation. That organization called Royal something for bird protection, and similar the replica was created here. That is called now the name of that body is Wildlife and Nature Protection Society. The beginning, their name was a different one. So they were creating a big fuss, and they were the ones who created this conservation culture during this time. So he was not successful, even though he promoted this idea, Colonel Clark. Then his successor, however, persuaded to pass 2 ordinances. The one ordinance is an ordinance to prevent wanton destruction of elephants, buffaloes, and other games. Then there were proclamations which prohibit the export of deer hides for trade. And the other one is an ordinance to readjust the custom duties leviable on firearms and to impose on an export duty on certain hides and horns. And during that time, the paid watchers employed to protect the wildlife areas, and people who paid the salary of these watchers were the members of that particular organization, Wildlife and Nature Protection Society. And if you evaluate these legislations, the first two are command and control measures because they are banning certain activities, they are creating crimes, and the other one is economic tool, where they are intervening with the tax structure to adjust the market and create a situation where market take care on the conservation of this asset, the biodiversity. At that time, it was wildlife. So if you put the modern jargons into this situation, during that time also, the people use command and control methods, and at the same time, economic tools to manage the biodiversity resource of Sri Lanka. And in early 20th century, then Ministry of Agriculture and Lands, he appointed a committee known as Fauna and Flora Protection Committee to examine and report on the local situation. So that is the first one. That because he wanted to have consultation from the stakeholders. That means the first option that we all have to do something for the protection of the biodiversity. So now his committee has recommended there should be a new legislation for the protection of the biodiversity. So that was the Fauna and Flora Protection Ordinance number 2 of 1937. So even though this law is very old, by looking at the title, we can say that, but it has all the modern approaches on conservation of biodiversity. So if you go into details and study the act, I think it's an evolving act with a very strong foundation, but it supports biodiversity conservation. So my personal view is this is a good act that others can take an example. So what is Fauna and Flora Protection Ordinance? Now, I'm not going to give a law lecture here because all of us are scientists in a different area. Now, to analyze the objective of any act or ordinance, you have to read the long title of it because it gives you the area it covers. So it says, an ordinance to provide for the protection and conservation of the fauna and flora of Sri Lanka and their habitats, for the prevention of commercial and other misuses of such fauna and flora and their habitats, for the conservation of the biodiversity of Sri Lanka, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. I have highlighted the important terms. So this particular piece of legislation focuses on protection and conservation. Usually, if you evaluate the term conservation, conservation includes the protection. But when people decide on the long title, they wanted to keep the protection term also, even though it includes in the conservation, to highlight the protection aspect, protection biasness of this legislation. So this legislation, even though it talks about conservation, it leans towards protection. And the fauna and flora of Sri Lanka, so fauna and flora and their habitats. Now, fauna and flora is only 2 kingdoms compared to the 7 kingdoms. I don't know. I am not a true, full biologist. So there are 7 kingdoms, I think. So out of that, there are 2 kingdoms, fauna and flora. Then it tells about that we are protecting only fauna and flora. It's not so, because it talks about their habitat. So when we talk about the habitats of that fauna and flora, that means it includes all the elements, even the rocks and soil and everything includes into that habitat component. Then the prevention of commercial and other misuses. So it's very straightforward. And for the conservation of the biodiversity of Sri Lanka. Now here the prevention of commercial and other misuses. Commercial is its market, and other misuses may be the need and the greed. So it try to prevent the needs, the misuses arise out of the needs and the greed. And at the same time, it focuses on the conservation of the biodiversity of Sri Lanka. to answer my first question, the principal law governing biodiversity conservation, fauna and flora protection ordinance number 2 of 1937, because even though other environment related acts talk about different aspects of conservation, this act directly talk about biodiversity conservation. Now, by the end of this next month, the title will be changed, and that title will be added with international conventions. So that means we are linking our act with the international situation also. So that will be a different story. But by next month, we are going to change this. Now, according to the number 2 of 1937 ordinance, the mandate of executing the provisions of that particular ordinance was given to the Department of Wildlife Conservation. So the Department of Wildlife Conservation is mandated to conserve the biodiversity of Sri Lanka. So that is how we feel. Then what is the approach of fauna and flora protection ordinance on research? Now, the fauna and flora protection ordinance has 2 parts. Protection of habitats of wild fauna and flora, and the other part is protection of individual species. Now, in the Act, you have something called national reserves. There are national parks, strict nature reserves, the sanctuaries, and corridors, marine national parks, managed elephant reserves, a number of different national reserves and sanctuaries and managed elephant reserves. So those are looking at an area, a space, right? So that means you are protecting a system or ecosystem, or that kind of, you are protecting a habitat or ecosystem or an area. And the other part is protecting the individual species. So that comprises of number of lists of highly protected species, unprotected species, the birds and the reptiles and the fishes. We have several lists. So now this act talks about 2 things. It looks at areas and individual species. So that is the simple way of analyzing this one. The national reserves, sanctuaries, and managed elephant reserves there. Then list of protected fauna and flora. Then prominence given to research. Now, I would like to quote 2 sections in the Act to highlight the prominence given to this research in this Act. Now, among the protected area, national reserves, the highly protected or the very important protected national reserve is the strict nature reserve. Now, what you can do inside the nature reserve is discussed here. Now, it says section 4, subsection 1 says, no person other than the director shall enter or remain within any strict nature reserve. So, Director General is the only person who is allowed to enter and remain. So, without entering and remaining in a strict nature reserve, you can't do any other thing, right? You can't observe plants, you can't observe animals, you can't dig soils, you can't blast rocks, you can't do anything. So DG is the only one. Then except, there is an exception. There are 2 exceptions. For the purpose of discharging any official duty on the instruction or with the written permission of the director. So if a person want to discharge a duty, if a police officer want to, do a duty or catch a, criminal living inside this strict nature reserve, still they have to get the approval of the Director General, and that particular purpose can be authorized. So for the purpose of discharging any official duty on the instruction or with the written permission of the director. So director can instruct somebody to discharge his or her duty, or Director General can authorize any person to discharge his or her duty. And the other thing is under the authority and in accordance with the conditions of a written permit from the director. Now, that is not a blank check. That particular approval goes with a set of conditions. So the person has to discharge his or her duty according to the conditions in that permit. So that is the exemption, right? And I said earlier, DG can authorize anything, right? But subsection 2 restricts. DG can't do anything, but he has some listed activities for which he can give the authority. That is, a permit under subsection 1B shall be issued only for the purpose of authorizing scientific research. So in a strict nature reserve, other than discharging the official duty by a wildlife officer or any other officer identified by the Director General, the only person who can enter and remain or do whatever that activity inside the strict nature reserve is a researcher. Because DG can only authorize scientific research. So that is the prominence given in this act for research work. So researchers, you people are, lucky because you are getting privilege that other people don't have. So it is a privilege. Then the other section is section 55, subsection 1. The director may by a writing under his hand. Under his hand means he has to personally authorize that. Authorize any person to do any act otherwise prohibited or penalized under this ordinance. That means director can authorize a person to do any crime described in this particular ordinance. Now, Fauna and Flora Protection Ordinance has described number of crimes that ordinary people can't do. But DG can authorize any person to do any crime, right? Which is mentioned in the Fauna and Flora Protection Law. So DG is the sole authority. Otherwise prohibited or penalized under this ordinance or any regulation made thereunder. Not only this particular act, this ordinance, but any regulation made under the provision of this ordinance, those crimes also can be committed by a person authorized by the DG. Now, there also DG has a restriction. DG must have, if he is in the opinion, such act should be authorized for the protection, preservation, propagation, or for the scientific study or scientific investigation, or for the collection of specimens, a national zoo or national museum, or for any university established or deemed to be established under the University Act number 18 of 1378. So now any DG can authorize any crime to be committed for a research work. So researchers are privileged crowd because they can officially do crimes, right? Now, section 52, subsection 2 says, no person authorized under subsection 1 to be to do any act shall, by reason only of the commission of that act, be guilty of an offense under this ordinance or any regulation made thereunder. Complicated, I will explain. Now, the second section says, now, if a researcher or a person authorized by the DG to do any act inside any act which is a crime according to this one, and by committing that crime, he cannot be penalized. Now, police department can, take you to the court saying that you have committed an offense, which is defined in the Fauna and Flora Protection Ordinance, but because the DG has authorized you to do. So this is the prominence given to a researcher. So are you happy? Now you are privileged crowd among the other citizens. Then if I reiterate the points that I have read, principal law governing biodiversity conservation is the Fauna and Flora Protection Ordinance number 2 of 1937. The DWC is mandated to conserve the biodiversity of Sri Lanka. FFPO encourages the scientific research to the highest possible extent, but with stringent conditions. Why stringent conditions? Now, this is the reason. Now, if you now this is few patents. Now, all these patents are for Salacia, that is Kotalehembutu. Now, who owns the patent? Fuji, Japan. In Japan, I don't think they have Salacia. So how did they got these patents? Because somebody in our country has smuggled this out and hand it over to them, and they somehow get the patent, for their country. So if a drug, now this is for medical purpose, if a drug is prepared, we will get nothing, but that country will get the benefit. So now we have protected our biodiversity, but we get nothing. So why should we protect biodiversity? Right? So if we protect, if we avoid this kind of situations, then we can use that thing, right? So the researchers have to do this kind of things. They have to patent things and get that right to the country of Sri Lanka, right? Now these companies are trying to have small plants here, and to extract the powdered form, the Kotalehembutu to extract in powdered form, because they want to do other processing things in their country, and to get the to identify the exact whatever the active ingredient. So after they identify that and chemically create that one in a lab, then we lose the demand for our Kotalehembutu, that kind of medicine. And to give Kotalehembutu to drink for a patient in Sri Lanka, we have to pay the patent, whatever the royalty to Japan. So that is one reason, because now we want to avoid this thing happen. Because if DG authorizes a scientist to do something illegal for the benefit of the science under his signature, that means he is personally responsible, right? Now for this thing, if DG has given an authority without considering all the aspects, taking the due, without the due diligence, he has to answer, right? So nobody is going to save him. So that is why the stringent conditions to be employed. This is the other one, Binera. Binera is patented for another country, and this particular plant is ours, our biodiversity. And now I think they are selling it as an ornament plant, but we can't get a single cent out of it. And those are not, 10 rupee, 20 rupee, business. Those are $1 million businesses. And we are now short of dollars, and I don't know how much time we can survive in this way without cutting the electricity. So, but we lost an opportunity to earn foreign currency. So that is one. And this is another thing. Now, during the last COP, the Department of Wildlife Conservation, the government of Sri Lanka, we wanted to put 4 Sri Lankan species into Appendix 1 of CITES. Now, the CITES is talking about the conservation, and their criteria of making decisions is precautionary principle. That means if there's a doubt, you have to assume that there is a danger, right? So now, but these 4 projects, we had to append, these proposals, we had to abandon because they say the inadequacy of data. But the principle is precautionary principle. Even though now, because there are businesses happening now, these are $1 million businesses, and we have never given a permit to export these species into Europe, but they are having multi-million pet industry in Europe. So somebody has taken these samples to outside the country. So I was a part of that delegation, and we fought very hard, but the diplomatic pressure was very high. So we had to dilute our proposals. That is what they have mentioned. This is an international news site. EU makes a factor as Sri Lanka pulls its punch on protection for lizards. So we have to be careful because we can't fight in the international arena because we are a small country. Only thing is we have to keep our house in order. Now this is, you can see these lizards can sell more than $1,000 each. Right, so that is another article. Study document how Sri Lanka's protected reptiles are traded as pets in the developed countries. So somebody has taken this out from Sri Lanka. And this is a recent case. We prosecuted 3 Russians, and the highest recorded fine last week imposed on those Russians, that is 8.6 million for biopiracy. Now, number of charges, 102 charges. But originally in our plane, there were 300 odd charges. Right, but there was the diplomatic discussions between Russia and our country, and there were, you know, because even though we are a sovereign country, we can't enforce our sovereignty at the fullest level when it comes to deal with big countries. So we had to, strike a balance. So we had to cut it down more than half, so 102. If we maintain that 300 odd charges, this 8.6 maybe 16, no, maybe 20 million, right? So that is the fine we can enforce under the Fauna and Flora Protection Ordinance, right? And this is now several years back, we prosecuted 6 European and Australia, one from Australia, the others from Europe, and one from United States. We couldn't, grab him. So this is 6 people. And I personally led that thing. I had to shut down a huge hotel complex for one day. And I kept my job because if there were no specimen or nothing was detected there, then the hotel will file a case against me, and government is not going to appear on behalf of me. So I don't have money to spend on that kind of a legal thing. So I have to end up in jail or something. But I took that decision, and I raided, and they were prosecuted. And these people are, there are 2 people. They are the owners of this company, Exoterra, which is selling pets and pet-related equipment, right? They are having a serpentarium with the Buddha's statue. They call it Sri Lankan or something, serpentarium. Statue of Buddha is located there. So we asked them to remove that because it's hurting the Buddhists in the world. They promised us to do that, but I don't know. Even now I can see in Daraso and some other online this thing, they are selling the same serpentarium with the image of the Buddha. I don't know. So that is the first encounter. And this is a traffic bulletin, volume 3, number 1. Now here we have, those are the number of, species traded in, other markets, online markets. Now in 2017, it is totally 387. 2018, it is 477. So our biodiversity is traded in elsewhere for $1 million business. And if you see, this is the imports of Sri Lankan reptiles species into United States. Now, we have never issued any fauna and flora, any certificate, import license to export these species. But they are importing. How can that happen? Right. So now 2013, it recorded a very high figure. 2015 again. Now those are the recorded things, right? Now if this is if this is 10% of the whole business, because those records and those are illegal wildlife market, so the real number may be higher than this. So we want to avoid this kind of things from happening. So that's why we are having stringent things. Now, if you come to the Department of Wildlife Conservation asking a research permit, we put this FFPO glass and look at you and from your top to bottom and inspect everything and ask 1,000 questions. Don't get offended, because we are not getting out anything out of that exercise. What we are doing is to protect our biodiversity, and your duty is to generate the scientific knowledge, record it, and get whatever the intellectual property rights or patent or anything for the mother country, the Sri Lanka, right? So we don't have any other focus. So don't get offended. If you satisfy all our conditions, then it's a matter of 1 or 2 days to get your permission. Now, if I discuss our research policy, now this is the way of doing it. Now, when we receive a proposal, if it is a low impact one, like a 6-month undergraduate study or something, and if there are no problems with the objective of the Department of Wildlife Conservation, they straight away we approve those projects. So undergraduates are getting clearance very quickly, provided that they are not collecting samples, so doing any they want to kill samples, so they want to take material out of the protected area. So if they are doing observatory type of research work, like for tourism and that kind of things, then it's very easy. Otherwise, that proposal goes to the research committee of the Department of Wildlife Conservation. Research committee is not the Department of Wildlife Conservation. The members are from universities, and that committee reviews the reports, and if they think it is allowable, then we approve the proposal, or otherwise we reject. But ultimate decision is with the Director General, because even the committee approves, DG has the right to reject it, because he is the person who is responsible for all his all these kind of approvals, right? So he has the discretion. If somebody is not happy with this situation, then he can appeal that to the minister, right? Then minister will appoint another committee, and he will revisit the decision and take a decision on that, right? So that is how it should be happening. Now, if I outline, a permit is required to conduct any activity regulated by the Fauna and Flora Protection Ordinance. As such, research involving protected species, research conducted in protected areas are required permits. Species, individual species, and the protected areas. Those are the two categories that we protect using Fauna and Flora Protection. Then DWC encourages biodiversity-related research, research aimed at developing scientific management interventions to conservation challenges, recovering the population of the threatened species, controlling the spread of invasive species, and reducing human-elephant conflict is especially encouraged. The importance of new findings related to wildlife science and the sustainable use of natural resource for national economic development is also recognized. So this is the outline of the policy. There is another few. In general, the department processes research permit application within 6 weeks. Because those research proposals are very thick, we have to go through it, and we have to dispute that among the other members and get their comments, and also usually 6 weeks, but it goes sometimes 2 months. In evaluating an application, the previous research experience and accomplishments of the applicants are taken into account. Now, if this person is a frequent person coming into the department for researchers, and his previous researchers are very satisfied, and he's behaving good, then it's easy for him to get the approval for his research. A person with limited previous experience or accomplishments in biodiversity research are encouraged to apply in collaboration either with the scientists with such background from a national university or state institution or the DWC itself. So, inexperienced newcomer, he can submit a proposal with a supervisor who is having sound knowledge on that area. Where necessary, in awarding a permit, the department may also require that the research be conducted under direct supervision of its staff. So usually that is a condition that we put. If you are collecting data, then there should be a wildlife officer in that vicinity to observe what they are doing. Then any person aggravated by the department's decision in relation to the issue of a permit may make an appeal to the minister in terms of section 56, subsection 2 of the Fauna and Flora Protection Ordinance. So that is the grievance mechanism, handling mechanism. Submission of research proposal, the principal investigator of the research project must be working in collaboration with the recognized scientific institute. Foreign researchers should always submit the proposal to the head of their institution and collaborated with the local institute or research division of the Department of Wildlife Conservation. All the research proposals submitted for approval should reach directed DWC office at least 2 months ahead. Proposals for long-term intensive research proposals may take at least 4 months for scrutiny. Right? So regarding foreigners, they have to work with the local because we want to establish whatever the rights that they create out of that research with Sri Lanka. That's why we put it that way. Then approval, all the project proposals for long-term intensive studies will be referred to the research committee. I explained that. Approval will be granted on strict observation of legal provisions of the Fauna and Flora Protection Ordinance. Application should provide for any further clarification and should accept suggestions. That when we make a suggestion, you have to, flexible to accommodate that. Then prior approval should be taken for any changes in the project procedure or personnel involved in the research. So when you submit your proposal, you have to submit as the list of people involving in that project. If you are changing, you are allowed to change, but you have to provide that change prior to execute that particular change. In the case of a long-term research proposal, initial approval for research proposal will be limited to a maximum period of 1 year for the date granted. Now, if you want to submit a long-term research like for dieback, 10 years, 15 years, then we don't give that clearance for the entire period. But for first year, you have to get it, and you have to show the first year results and get it extended. Usually we do. In the case of a long-term research proposal, further extension to the project period are subjected to the satisfactory review of the project activities. Now, sometimes we have noted that some people get a research proposal passed and use that provision to do some other things, right? So they get a, proposal approved for visitor surveys, but using that approval, they count animals and they do various other things, right? So if we found that thing is happening, then we cancel that procedures. So for extending, for extension of a proposal, we are going through the behavior of that particular researcher, and if it is not satisfied, then we don't extend. Then collection of specimens and capture of live animals, collection of fauna and floral specimens for PA should be avoided unless it is extremely necessary. Now, protected areas are protected. So if you want to capture fauna or collect flora, then you have to avoid the protected area as far as possible, because protected areas, we want to keep it as it is for the nature to take care of itself. But in extreme circumstances, we allow. Capture and collection of specimens of rare, endangered, threatened, status unknown or undescribed species should be restricted to less than 3 specimens. If more specimens are required, special permission should be sought. Then standard capture method should be used, and every precaution should be taken to prevent any harm or injury. Record of the number and other information of the specimen collected should be maintained properly and forwarded to the department. In the case of long-term research proposal, biannual return of specimens should be done. Specimens to be exported for identification purpose should be declared to the department, and necessary export permits be obtained prior to the export. And if we need to have material transfer agreements or something, then those things also should be complied. Then monitoring activities of the research project with PA should be carried out under the close collaboration with the wildlife officer responsible for the management of that particular protected area. Then the details of the research activity and other information such as name and identity of the person involved should be provided. Then where appropriate, Director DWC will nominate a wildlife officer to collaborate with the research. DWC should be duly acknowledged in the report published. General conditions, prior permission should be taken if any filming with PA is required. Now here, for filming, we are charging a huge amount because it is a commercial thing. So the country needs to get something for that. Now, if somebody is doing a filming, then they have to get separate this thing. So now we want to avoid that people can get a simple research proposal approved, and using that approval create films. So we want to avoid that. Then research should be willing to present the data and findings of the research to the DWC staff in the form of a lecture when requested. So we also want to, now if there are new knowledge generated, department also need to grab that one for the purpose of conservation. 2 copies of the final report of the research and any audio visuals produced should be made available to the library of the Department of Wildlife Conservation, because then we can allow the other researchers, the future researchers, to go through your research work and avoid the pitfalls that you have been fallen, and make his or her research more effective than your one. Then DWC is not responsible for any form of damage to any property of life occurred during the study period of thereafter, because we in the Department of Wildlife Conservation are not sure about our lives. That is the nature of our job. So how can we take care of any other person? So we have to avoid that burden from us, so we don't take any responsibility for your damages. Now, have I explained any unfair condition? Because this approval should be given personally by our director, because he has delegated that authority to me. So that means I have to be personally responsible. Now, so far have I, given you any unfair condition or request? Have I? Nobody will answer. But I have never given any unfair condition. Whatever the conditions that we put forward is for the good of the country, and we want to get the maximum out of your finding to the country, not personally for me or the department or the DGO, the government, but for the entire nation. So that is why all these conditions are included, right? But now this is a recent situation. Now, I found this article in 9th January, Sunday Times. It says, Red Scorpion research told Wildlife Department silence stints para zoologists. Now, these particular researchers are working with us for last, now I joined the department 25 years back, 23 or 5. And the very first lecture I heard in the department is from this group of researchers on the dieback, right? And we were providing grants and we were providing all the supports, but we find this kind of news articles after 25 years of relationship. Now the time to divorce maybe, right? So now here it says we are silent, and the foreign ministry is also silent. And this is the other article in Daily Mirror. So appearing one article in one paper can be a mistake. So usually the reporters are, maybe we have newspaper reporters here. They want to make news glamorous and eye-catchy. So they put titles sometimes which are wrong. But appearing in different papers and different websites and everywhere, that means there is a problem, right? Now, the problem in this research is that one person is in that research group, and he is working on tourist visa, right? So tourists are not allowed to do research here, right? So can you see, now I showed that Russians, no, they are also very, high-end scientists, professors, right? We find them 8.6 million for committing that crime. It is a crime, right? So if somebody comes from outside, then we have to get that person linked to a national institute, and he has to work under the proper visa, because then only we can, then only he's responsible for us, right? Now, recently we found one of our faunal species named with some Indian scientist name, and that specimen was smuggled out without any permit. So we started an investigation. Now, international investigation is very difficult to conduct, because now we can't take that the person who committed that central bank fraud back to Sri Lanka. No, so those are $1 million things. But for a bat or grasshopper thing, nobody will send that person to our country for the prosecution, right? And the paper was published in the high impact journal. We wrote to them that this person is saying that that specimen is located somewhere in some museum or somewhere. So when we inquired, when we did the inquiry this morning, that lady was with us, but she had to leave early, and that there was no specimen in that particular place. And when we inquire that from the author, he says now that specimen sent to the Sri Lankan National Museum. Now that cannot happen. Or to come that specimen back to Sri Lanka, there must be a material transfer agreement or import permit issued by the Department of Wildlife Conservation. To get the import one, then there must be an export one also, right? Nothing is, no such permit is there. And when we inquire that from the National Museum, they have never received such a thing. So we reported that to this high impact journal, and with all their ethical standards they are having, the answer was they have nothing to do. You deal that with the author, right? Now all these conditions are for people like us in this kind of countries. If you have, misspelled the name of a quoted author or somebody, then your paper will be rejected, right? That is the way they evaluate. But for this kind of things, they even don't contact the author and ask a question. But that opportunity, whatever the wealth that we had, we lost. Right now we can't, because horse has escaped. So now closing the door is no meaning. So now the researchers need to understand our situation, and they have to act with due diligence, publishing this kind of things, because if these researchers are not happy with our decision, then he can lodge a formal complaint or whatever with the minister, right? Then there will be an inquiry. But this is very unethical, because then people start, now this particular writer, this person is writing very bad on the Department of Wildlife Conservation. Then the general public looks with a suspicious eye on that. Then the law of the country is devalued. So we have to avoid that situation. So then when it comes to research, everybody needs strict protection. Now, all the researchers, if I conduct a workshop and ask from the researchers what kind of a protection that we need to have on this, now this very same today's session, you are having the protection of biodiversity of the Sri Lanka is the tag, right? So everybody want to have a strict protection. Everybody wants to strictly regulate others' research, right? Everybody wants facilitate their research, not the others' research. So that is the problem that we have in the country, right? All the promises to compliance are shown before the approval. Before approving, everything is, all the promises are made. Very cooperative until approval is granted and the study is ongoing. Reporting obligations are rarely complied. When I take I am in charge of the research and training division now. I took that 6 months back. There were we have given thousands of approvals to research work. There should be biannual report and final report, 2 copies in all our libraries. I have found very few. So I had to write each and every individual. Then they felt very bad, right? I had to write to them saying that if you don't provide all these research reports, we are going to cancel your whatever thing, and we will consider these things when you request for another new proposal. Then they felt very bad. Then final reports are often not provided, feels offended when requested. If rejected, things like what I have shown you happens. Right? So that is very unprofessional, I would say. Because we are not the people evaluating this proposal, those evaluations are also done by the academics in universities. So we believe that they are having the required capability or whatever the talents they require to do that kind of an evaluation. So we blindly believe. So points, we are very happy to see the academic goals of researchers are achieved. If you are aiming at a PhD, we are very happy to have you have a PhD. If you want to publish a very your research in a high impact journal, we are very happy to support you. Help the country to obtain the maximum benefit out of your research. That is our requirement. Do your part to pass this asset and the future benefits to next generation as a heritage, rather than giving the patent to some other developed country. If you are a foreign researcher, especially respect the commitment of the local communities who sacrifice their right to consume that particular resource. In conserving the biodiversity for the world, give their stake to them, not to us. Adhere to the rules and regulations as they are very simple if you don't have any hidden agenda. Those conditions are very simple if you are straightforward. Respect the risk taken by the person approving the project, the person who is signing that approval, the DG. He is personally taking that risk, as negative consequences often faced by him or her. Be consistent on your policies in both the instances, accept or reject. Right? You have to be consistent on. Now, when we select, if you volunteer to participate in our research committee, then you have to treat other researchers with an open heart, right? Then, now this is for foreigners. That doesn't say this kind of fines will applicable only for foreigners. Even the locals, the same offenses, the same fine. So that is the danger of it if don't allow us to file these kind of cases. So thank you very much. And again, I have to thank the organizers to give me this chance, because we have to go out and explain all these things to researchers, then we can avoid that kind of conflicting situations in the future. Thank you.